Good morning, everybody. It's Monday Grades. I'm your host, Wes Huber at fantasypoints.com. And, I guess the way I would define week three, as we had some sketchy quarterback play, and, not so much on the efficiency side, but on the production side. We only had a couple of guys that really stood out. And we'll start with Cincinnati quarterback Joe Burrows. So 23 out of 36, 64% completion percentage, 74% if we account for drops, deflected passes, things like that. 275 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, 114.9 passer rating. So I like to see yards per attempt lower than the air yards per attempt to evaluate how aggressive the quarterback was, and knowing that it wasn't a dump off late garbage time situation. That's exactly what we got with Burrow. 7.6 yards per attempt, 9 air yards per attempt. So he won 27-12, but I feel like there was some potential there that they took their foot off the gas, and a lot of that had to do with the ground game, but we'll get to that later. So for Baltimore, wow. So they've scored over 35 points, actually 37 or more the last two games. So Lamar Jackson, 19 out of 29, 62%, 73 when we account for the other things. 218 yards, pretty much around what we can expect from him in a typical game. But 4 touchdowns, 1 interception, 110.3 passer rating, 7.5 yards per attempt, 10.4 air yards per attempt. He also added an 11-1-0-7-1 rushing line, and they ended up defeating New England 37-26. I think most importantly, coming out of that game, is it did appear that Mac Jones has a high ankle sprain. I'm not a doctor, but just the way that he was screaming all the way down the tunnel. So it didn't seem like your typical ankle sprain, but we'll have to get more information on that. So in Chicago, actually, I think Lamar Jackson only had 3 touchdown passes, and maybe it was 0 interceptions. I think I recorded the wrong thing there. Anyway, moving on to running back, and this is, and of course, Joe Burrow was our A+ grade, and then Lamar Jackson is an A. So moving on to running back, our A+ is definitely Khalil Herbert. So David Montgomery went down to injury. We'll have to get a report on that. But so Herbert, I mean, he just blew up. And, especially in DFS, finding the guys that are going to score 2 touchdowns is just a gold mine. I don't think anybody had Herbert here unless you were just filling out 150 and throwing players into lineups. Herbert, 20 carries, 157 yards, 2 touchdowns. I mean, just unbelievable day. 7.8 yards per attempt. I mean, it's just so impressive that he did that. And he didn't even play the full game with Montgomery in there early, but 86% of that yardage came after contact. 7 broken tackles. He caught a couple of passes. They ended up defeating the Texans 23-20. So going back to the Baltimore-New England game, my A grade at running back is Ramondre Stevenson. 12 carries, 73 yards and a touchdown, 6.1 yards per attempt. 91% of that came after contact. He had 4 receptions for 29 yards, 5 total broken tackles. He's definitely taken over the James White role. And it just, to be honest, Damian Harris didn't look bad. He just was not the same type of efficient or being able to work through contact and just the footwork of Stevenson is it's superior to Harris, and it's just a matter of time before we see Stevenson take over more and more of that role. So in Philadelphia, definitely my A+ for the day was Devonta Smith. And it was another one where there was potential for so much more. I felt like Philadelphia took their foot off the gas there. I don't like to see that as much. I think you don't take your foot off the gas until you approach 40 points. You definitely don't before you hit 30. Just, you never know what's going to happen. Just like when you saw Miami come back last week and beat Baltimore, but they won this game. So 24-8, the Washington couldn't really do anything. But for Devonta, so 12 targets, 8, 169, 1. He led all receivers with 7 first downs, 4.45 yards per route run, just monster day here, and 21.1 yards per reception. 38% of that still, it came after the catch, and he had a 137.5 targeted passer rating. I knew my investment of the week in DFS was AJ Brown, but it was Devonta who come in and vultured a lot of that away. Still a good game for AJ, but it was it definitely had the right location, the wrong receiver. So in New Orleans, and we'll get to this more later. The Saints, they ended up losing 22-14, but Chris Olave, he's just been just a phenomenon so far for the Saints. It hasn't been Jarvis Landry, and it's been deep stuff too. I mean, he's just providing everything he did at Ohio State. A grade for Chris Olave, 12 targets, 147, didn't get into the end zone. 5 first downs, 3.77 yards per route run, and 16.3 yards per reception, 22% of that after the catch. Also want to throw an A grade at the Miami defense. Pressure Josh Allen on 81% of his dropbacks. They had 49 individual pressures, 8 hits, and 4 sacks. They forced Josh Allen to throw 61 passes or so, because they couldn't move the ball on the ground. Yes, it was like a truck drove right through that Buffalo defense. And, to be honest, Tua, he was banged up in this game. So, wow, that was just an impressive performance for Miami, and they're definitely moving up the power ranks in the NFL. Definitely a playoff contender, which is crazy for me to say. So for my B grades, Jalen Hurts, he would have got an A grade if it wasn't for the fact that he didn't do much on the ground, but he didn't really have to. But it just wasn't our typical Jalen Hurts blow up game. So, a B grade is more fitting. So 22 out of 35, 63%, 340 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 123.5 passer rating, and 9.7 yards per attempt, 11.8 air yards per attempt. He added, like I said, it wasn't that great, but a 10-20 rushing line. And they came away with the win, 24-8. Philadelphia, another big time playoff contender. So going back to Miami, Tua Tagovailoa, 13 out of 18, so 72% completion percentage, would have been 82% when we account for the drops, the passes deflected, 186 yards passing, 1 touchdown, 123.8 passer rating, 10.3 yards per attempt, 10.4 air yards per attempt. He is not dumping this ball off. He is targeting down the field, vertical the whole game. And if not for that injury that he was driving in the second quarter before he went out, and then Teddy Bridgewater came in, got sacked, threw an incompletion, and they had to punt. Tua was about to lead the Dolphins. I mean, working aggressively down the field in the 2-minute drill. Moving on to running back Nick Chubb. And this is a Thursday game, but that's okay. 23 carries, 113 yards, and a touchdown. So 4.9 yards per attempt. That's, not is the elite of what we see from a Chubb game, but 92% of that was earned after contact. He broke 7 tackles, which topped the NFL this week. Rushing, but didn't do anything as a receiver. That's why he gets a B grade. 0-0-0 receiving. They won 29-17. James Robinson. It's just this. Nobody wants this guy, and I'm like, I'll take him. Look, 17-101. He blew up going up against a tough Chargers defense. 5.9 yards per carry. 46% of that was after contact. He only broke 2 tackles, but he added 3 catches for 16 yards. Robinson, people, you got to wake up. Robinson has been beast this year. You're not going to get 100 yards out of your running back every week. So Jalen Waddle, though, man, If this guy played more, he definitely would have had an A grade. Only 16 routes. He had 5 targets, caught 4 of them, 102 yards, no touchdown this week. All 4 for a first down, obviously. 6.38 yards per route run, 25.5 yards per reception. Added 18% of that after the catch, 118.8 targeted passer rating. So we've been expecting this, and it took 3 games to get it. In Arizona, Hollywood Browns, 17 targets, 14 140, 7 first downs, 2 tied with Devonta in that category, 2.37 yards per route run. So it was essentially in the entire game, 10 yards per reception. So this is more of the drop off passes, check downs from. I mean, they were playing from behind. It makes sense. Only 5% of that came after the catch. So it was basically just check down tackle, 102.5 targeted passer rating. Surprised that the Rams didn't score more in this one. The Rams have had an interesting season so far. Their defense is showing up, but the offense just hasn't really been there yet. 20-12, they beat Arizona. So the biggest second half improvements. Let's start with Trevor Lawrence. I mean, over the last 2 games, they've beaten opponents 62-10. And we're talking about the Colts and the Chargers. So these aren't cream puffs. First half, Trevor Lawrence was okay. He was 15 for 24, 63%, had 151 passing yards, had a touchdown, 94.3 passer rating, 6.3 yards per attempt, 7.4 air yards per attempt. So not bad. Second half, though, he went 13 out of 15, 87%. Take away the drop, it's 93%. 111 yards, 2 touchdowns, 137.1 passer rating, 7.4 yards per attempt, but his air yards per attempt plummeted down to 3.1. That's a 58% drop. But it really all circles around to the fourth quarter, where he was a perfect 7 for 7, 52 yards, a touchdown, 137.2 passer rating. Again, 7.4 yards per attempt and only 3 air yards per attempt. So he's not being aggressive, but at the same time, young quarterback, he's trying to take what the defense gives him, presents him, and so that he can, lead his team to victory. Really good game. So Jameis Winston, something is definitely up with Winston here. So it's either the fractures in his back or whatever's going on there, or something to do with Carmichael. This has been really strange how Winston has been playing. So consider that through 3 games, during the first 3 quarters of those games, he's 40 for 67, 60% passing, 324 yards, 0 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, 72 passer rating, 4.8 yards per attempt, an always aggressive Winston, even when there's no production, at 9.5 air yards per attempt. But during the fourth quarter, 34 out of 48, 69% in the fourth quarter of the first 3 games, 534 yards. He's thrown 4 touchdowns. Yes, he's thrown 5 interceptions. And understandably, they've been behind in every game going into the fourth quarter. But a 93.9 passer rating, that's a 23% improvement. 11.1 yards per attempt, that's a 43% improvement. And then his air yards even goes up even more to 15.7. That's a 39% improvement. So the Saints have been outscored 39-13 over the first 3 quarters, but they're outscoring opponents 38-29 during the fourth quarter. So looking at the game that we just saw, he was 14 out of 25, 173 yards, obviously no touchdowns or interceptions, 77.6 passer rating, 6.9, 11.3. So in the fourth quarter, though, if we adjust for the different factors, he had an 85% completion percentage, 180 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. He was only responsible for 1 of those. 87.5 passer rating, 11.3 yards per attempt, which is a 39% improvement, 16.3 air yards per attempt, 31% improvement. They lost 22-14. I think it's time for Carmichael to take the handcuffs off of Winston. Just let him air it out. The running game just hasn't been there. And I think a lot of teams are coming into these matchups knowing what the Saints want to do. It's either that or keep doing what you're doing. You're 1-2. Something needs to be changed here, or you're going to have to go with a different quarterback. Winston and the offense just isn't rolling right without just letting Winston air it out. So Cordero Patterson, 7 carries, 34 yards, and a touchdown in the first half, 4.9 yards per carry. 45% of that came after contact, no receptions. That's the first half. Second half, 10 carries, 107 yards. That's 10.7 yards per carry. That's a 54% increase. 31% of that came after contact. He added a 12-yard catch. Just keep in mind that he gained 68% of his yardage yesterday prior to contact. That's the highest of anyone I've charted thus far all season. They did win 27-23. The Seahawks are looking just as bad as we thought. Although, Geno Smith is looking pretty okay. So Las Vegas, Devonta Adams has caught a touchdown pass back-to-back games. I'll give him that. But we thought it was going to be the Devonta Adams show. Yesterday it was the Mac Hollins show. So overall, 9 targets, 8 158, 6 first downs, 3.51 yards per route run, 19.8 yards per reception, 27% of that after contact, a 155.8 targeted passer rating, but only 1 catch for 20 yards with 1 first down and 1.33 yards per run in the first half. It was a 7-138-1 line with 5 first downs and 4.6 yards gained per route in the second half that got it done. So Terry McLaurin, wow. First half, 1 target, nothing. Second half, 6 catches, 102 yards. It was everything. It was when, obviously Washington was down. And, 4 first downs of those 6 receptions and a 3.19 yards per route run in the second half. It wasn't a pretty game for Washington. I'm sure Philadelphia and their fans alike love the results of that game going up against their bitter rival. So for the D grades, we're going to start at quarterback with Justin Fields. So 8 out of 17, 47%. Adjusted to 60%, 106 yards, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, a 27.7 passer rating, 6.2 yards per attempt, 8.7 air yards per attempt. Now we know the Bears, they want to run the ball, and that's their primary focus. But when Fields was under center, he was pressured 13 times on 25 dropbacks, which resulted in 5 sacks. So for a guy like Josh Allen, who's definitely towards the top of the list of the MVP race, it's a lot different than it is for Justin Fields. We're essentially talking about a rookie here. He definitely hasn't played a full season yet, and his offensive line just cannot protect him. It's a bad situation for him because he's going to be his play is going to be just scrutinized big time, playing for a popular team like Chicago, and in a big city like that. And it's unfortunate, but of those 13 times that he was pressured, so 5 of them were sacks. Of the 8 other times he was pressured, he did run for 3 times for 42 yards, broke 4 tackles and 2 first downs, and they won the game 23-20. They're sitting at 2-1. In fantasy, nobody cares about whether you won the game or not. They want to see production. And, it's going to come. We have to be patient. This is a run-first team. It's an offensive line that for some reason has actually been pretty good blocking for the run, but just can't protect their quarterback. Fields he's running around like a madman back there, to the point where a lot of times he's either running the ball getting sacked or just throwing it away because there's just an insane amount of pressure. All right, so I talked about just lost opportunities with the ground games with the ground game for Cincinnati, and there were a couple of guys, and one's a receiver that just really had a bad game overall. And one of them was Joe Mixon. 12 carries, 24 yards, averaged 2 yards per attempt. 79% of it came after contact. Who cares? It was 24 yards, three catches for 14 yards. He broke 2 tackles. This was the Jets. And now the Jets aren't as bad on defense this year, but it was a game where he should have been able to exploit for either on the receiving or the rushing end. You could tell he was frustrated on the field. It was obvious, and the reason that the Bengals only won 27-12 is due to their ground game. I'll be honest, so far through 3 games, Samaje Perine has looked better than Joe Mixon. The other guy that hasn't looked good is that didn't look good and who struggled so far this year outside of that first game where he caught 10 passes, Jamar Chase. So 39 routes, 10 targets, 629-1, had 2 first downs, 0.74 yards per route, 4.8 yards per reception. 38% of that came after the catch, but he had 1 drop, 1 fumble, and Sauce Gardner was in his head. No question. It was, again, like Joe Mixon, so obvious. Jump over to Detroit. Well, we saw Amon-Ra St. Brown's NFL record of 8 straight games with 8 receptions and 1 touchdown snapped. He had 6 receptions, 0 touchdowns, but he played well. There was nothing about his game stood out that we should be all over him for. I guess the one thing about the Detroit offense that really disappointed was the fact that they were unable to get it done. Minnesota made some adjustments in the second half that really, really mitigated Jared Goff's production. And the guy that really stood out to me that struggled in the second half was DJ Shark. 39 routes, 6 targets, 3 catches, 46 yards, most of that in the first half. Had a 1.18 yards per route, 15.3 yards per reception. Meh. He had 1 yard after the catch, and he also dropped a pass. He just disappeared. Moving on to the F grades. Okay, I was already done touting Baker Mayfield. I'm now done promoting Carolina wide receivers, and not because DJ Moore is not good, but because Baker Mayfield is that bad. Looking back to 2021, watching him complain about his left non-throwing shoulder and trying to justify his poor play based on that's just sickening at this point, because he has been even worse this year. 12 out of 25, 48% completion percentage. Yes, he threw a touchdown, no interceptions, puke. 83.8 passer rating, 6.8 yards per attempt, 6.1 air yards per attempt. They won 22-14 against this the Saints offense that Atlanta should have beat. Done with Carolina. So AJ Dillon wasn't his best game. He gets an F this week. 10 carries, 32 yards. 69% of that came after contact. 0 broken tackles. 2 catches, 6 yards. It was a boring game overall, with the only real fantasy performers were Romeo Doubs and on the other side, Russell Gage. Outside of that, I mean, it was a flat game. Alan Lazard caught a touchdown pass. Wasn't much going on there. So Houston, they needed him. They needed him bad going up against Chicago, and Brandon Cooks let him down. 32 routes, 6 targets, 222-0, 1 first down, 0.69 yards per route run, 11.5 yards per reception. 4% of his yardage came after the catch. That's 1 yard. And he had a drop and, a 5.6 targeted passer rating. So the rookie faceplant of the week. We're going back to Washington, where Jahan Dotson, 48 routes, 7 targets, 2 catches, 10 yards, 0.21 yards per route run, 0 first downs, 5 yards after the catch. He had a drop. They lost 24-8. That's it for this week's Monday Grades. I'm your host, Wes Huber. You can catch us at the same time next week, 9 a.m. on Monday at fantasypoints.com.